He was 18 years old when his stepmother handed him a key and an address, telling him he'd inherited a worthless ruin. What he found inside wasn't just his grandfather's legacy. It was a second chance he never knew he needed. If you've ever been told something you loved was worthless, or if you've ever had to start over from nothing, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The key was cold. Not just cool to the touch, but a deep, ancient cold. The kind that seems to come from the iron itself, a memory of the earth it was pulled from. It felt heavy in my palm, heavier than its small size suggested. It was a skeleton key, ornate and rusted, the kind you see in old movies. It was the only thing Sharon handed me. That and a folded, creased piece of paper with an address. "This is it," she said, her voice as thin and sharp as a shard of glass. She didn't look at me. She was looking past me, at the curb, where a taxi she'd called was waiting. My single duffel bag sat on the porch step beside me, looking small and pathetic. "Your inheritance. From your grandfather." The word inheritance sounded like an insult the way she said it. It was a joke. A final, petty jab. My father had been gone for 2 years, and for 2 years I'd been living in his house on borrowed time. My 18th birthday was 3 days ago. The clock had run out. "It's a farrier's shop," she continued, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, even though the spring air was mild. "In some town I've never heard of. It's been abandoned for years, probably condemned. But it's yours. The lawyer said so. All legal and binding." I looked from the key to her face. I was searching for something. A flicker of remorse? A hint of sadness? A memory of the woman who had once baked my favorite cookies when my dad was still alive. There was nothing. Her face was a smooth, blank mask of polite indifference. The sale of the house had closed yesterday. Her new life was starting, and it didn't include a teenage stepson who looked too much like his father. "What am I supposed to do with it?" I asked. My voice was quiet, hoarse. She finally met my eyes, and for a second I saw a flash of something. Not pity, irritation. Like I was a problem she'd already solved, but I refused to stay filed away. "I don't know, Alex. Sell it for scrap. That's your problem now. You're an adult." She said the word adult like it was a disease I'd just contracted. She turned without another word and walked back into the house. The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. It was a sound I'd been dreading for 2 years, a sound that said, "You are no longer welcome. You no longer belong." I stood on the porch for a long time, the key digging into my palm. The taxi driver honked, a short, impatient blast. I picked up my duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked down the steps of the only home I'd ever really known. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me to see. The house was just a building now, a collection of wood and nails that held no warmth. The warmth had died with my dad. The bus station was a gray, soulless place, smelling of disinfectant and despair. I bought a one-way ticket to a town called Sparrow Creek. The name sounded like something from a children's book, a place that couldn't possibly be real. The woman behind the counter gave me a tired look as she printed the ticket. She'd seen 1,000 kids like me, running away from something or running toward nothing at all. I wasn't running, I was being pushed. There's a strange sort of clarity that comes with having everything taken from you. When you're standing at absolute zero, the path forward is the only one there is. My path led to Sparrow Creek, to a worthless, abandoned farrier's shop, to the legacy of a grandfather I barely remembered. He died when I was 7. I had a few hazy memories of a large man with calloused hands who smelled of smoke and metal, a man who could hold a horseshoe in one hand and make it look as small as a toy. He and my dad had been estranged for years before that. A fight, a disagreement, something about my mom and the city, and a life my grandfather didn't approve of. My dad never talked about it. It was just another locked door in a house full of them. And now, all that was left of that side of my family was a rusty key and a dot on a map. Sharon was probably right. It was worthless. A pile of rotting wood and broken tools. But it was also the only thing in the entire world that was mine. The bus ride was long. I watched the city bleed into suburbs, the suburbs into sprawling exurbs, and finally into wide-open country. The concrete and steel gave way to green fields and dense patches of forest. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider, a vast, pale blue canvas that made me feel impossibly small. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and let the vibration of the road lull me into a state of numb exhaustion. I thought about Ms. Albright, the legal aid lawyer who had handled the estate. She'd spoken to me on the phone a week before my birthday, her voice professional, but not unkind. "The property is in your name, Alex," she'd explained. "Your grandfather, Arthur Vance, stipulated it in his will. It was to be held in trust until you turned 18. It's not much, I'm afraid. The land records show it's a small commercial plot with an old workshop on it, unimproved. The property taxes are modest, but they will be due in a few months." "Is it worth anything?" I'd asked, a flicker of foolish hope in my chest. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard the rustle of papers. "Candidly? Not a great deal. A developer, Vantage Holdings, has made a standing offer on that plot and several adjacent ones for years. Your grandfather always refused. The offer is low, frankly, insultingly so. They're banking on acquiring the land for cheap. If you wanted to sell, it would be a quick way to get a little cash, enough to get you on your feet, maybe. A few $1,000s. A few $1,000s. That was the price of my grandfather's legacy. The price of the only thing I had left. "I'll think about it," I'd said, though I didn't know what there was to think about. The bus pulled into Sparrow Creek just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden fingers of light across the main street. It was exactly what you'd picture. A single main road with a handful of storefronts, a grocery, a diner with a faded neon sign, a hardware store, a post office. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. There was no bus station, just a bench on the side of the road. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors opened, and the driver grunted, "Sparrow Creek." I was the only one who got off. I stood there for a moment, my duffel bag at my feet, and watched the bus pull away, its red taillights shrinking in the twilight until they disappeared. The silence it left behind was absolute. It was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of a cow. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. I pulled out the piece of paper Sharon had given me. 14 Blacksmith Lane. I asked an old man watering flowers in front of the hardware store for directions. He pointed a gnarled finger down a side street. "End of the lane," he said, his eyes lingering on me with a gentle curiosity. "Can't miss it. Old Art Vance's place. Hasn't been a hammer swung in there for over a decade." The lane was unpaved, more of a dirt track than a street. The houses were small and well kept, with neat gardens and porch swings. But at the very end of the lane, set back from the road and half swallowed by overgrown lilac bushes and tangled ivy, was the shop. It wasn't a ruin, not exactly. It was old, yes. The wood of the large barn-style doors was weathered to a silver gray, and the roof sagged a little in the middle like a tired old horse. But it was still standing. It looked solid, enduring. There was a small, attached structure on the side, a little office or living quarters with a single grimy window and a narrow door. I pushed my way through the overgrown gate. The hinges screamed in protest, The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and blooming honeysuckle. I walked up to the big double doors and saw the massive iron lock. It was ancient, a big, heavy thing that looked like it could have been forged right here in this shop. I slid the cold, rusty key into the lock. It resisted, grated, and then, with a final, shuddering groan, it turned. The click echoed in the evening quiet. It felt momentous, like a final seal being broken. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the smell of rot and decay, and pulled one of the heavy doors open. It didn't smell of decay. It smelled of history. The scent hit me all at once, a complex wave of cold iron, coal dust, old leather, and something else, something faintly animal, the ghost of 1,000 horses. The last of the evening light slanted through the dusty, web-covered windows, illuminating a scene frozen in time. A massive forge and anvil stood in the center of the room, silent and monolithic. The walls were lined with tools, each in its place, hanging from hooks and racks. Hammers of all shapes and sizes, tongs, rasps, files, pincers. They were coated in a thick layer of dust, but they were organized, cared for. This wasn't a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. It was a place that had been put to sleep. A fine gray dust covered everything, a soft blanket over a sleeping giant. I ran my finger along a workbench, leaving a clean streak in the grime. Beneath it was dark, oiled wood, scarred and burned from decades of work. I felt a strange sense of reverence. This was a place of creation, a place where raw, stubborn metal was bent and shaped by fire and will. I dropped my duffel bag by the door. I walked deeper into the shop, my footsteps echoing in the vast, high-ceilinged space. I saw the quenching tub, the leg vise, the neat stacks of horseshoes of varying sizes, all waiting for a horse that would never arrive. It was a museum of a forgotten craft, a monument to a man I never knew. On the main workbench, amidst the clutter of tools, was a small, heavy-looking wooden box. It was made of dark cherry wood, with intricate dovetail joints. It had a small brass lock, but unlike the one on the door, this one was closed, and I had no key. It seemed deliberately placed, a single, curated object in a room full of functional chaos. I picked it up. It was heavy. Something shifted inside. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different. This wasn't just a tool or a piece of equipment. This was a message. I spent the next hour searching for a key. I checked every drawer in the workbench, every dusty tin can, every nook and cranny of the main shop. Nothing. Frustrated, I moved to the small, attached office. The door was unlocked. Inside, it was Spartan. A simple wooden desk, a chair, a narrow cot against one wall, and a single bookshelf filled with old ledgers and books about metallurgy and equine anatomy. It was clear this was where he had lived, or at least slept, when the work was long. The air in the office was stale, but it was clean. The cot was neatly made, a threadbare woolen blanket folded at the end. On the desk, propped against a small tin lamp, was a single, small brass key. It wasn't ornate like the one for the main door. It was simple, functional. I knew, instantly, what it was for. I carried it back into the main shop, the twilight now fading into a deep, velvety darkness. I wiped the dust from the box, my hands trembling slightly. I inserted the key into the small brass lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded red velvet, was a single, thick envelope. My name, Alex Vance, was written on the front in a strong, clear, slightly slanted hand. This was it. This was the inheritance. Not the building, not the tools, not the worthless land. This. A letter from a ghost. I sat down on a dusty stool, the box in my lap, and for a moment, I just stared at it. I was afraid to open it. Afraid of what it might say. Afraid of what it might ask of me. The silence of the shop pressed in on me, a heavy, expectant weight. Finally, I broke the wax seal, the small insignia of a hammer and anvil crumbling under my thumb. I unfolded the pages. The letter began, My dear Alex, it read, if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have finally come home. I am sorry that we did not have more time. I am sorry for the distance that grew between your father and me. It is the greatest regret of my life. But I hope, with this place, and with what you find here, you might begin to understand. I had to stop and take a breath. The words felt alive, a voice speaking directly to me from the past. I could almost hear him, a low, rumbling voice, like stones in a riverbed. Your stepmother, I am sure, has told you this place is worthless. In a way, she is right. If you measure worth in dollars and cents, in market value and development potential, then she is absolutely correct. The scrap metal from the tools might buy you a decent meal. The land might fetch you enough to rent a small room for a few months. Vantage Holdings will be sniffing around. They are vultures in nice suits. They will offer you a pittance. I urge you, do not take it. The true value of this place is not in what it is, but in what it represents. It represents a promise I made to your grandmother, and a promise I am now passing on to you. This shop, this land, it has been in our family for 4 generations. We were never rich men, Alex, but we were honest men. We worked with our hands. We built things that lasted. We lived by a simple code. A man's word is his bond, and you stand up for what is right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I know this is a lot to ask of you. You are young, and you have been left with a burden you did not choose. But I did not leave you without resources. I have left you a choice. You can walk away from this, sell it all, and I would not blame you. Or, you can stay. You can discover the real inheritance I have left for you. It is not an easy path, but it is a worthy one. The choice begins with this shop. Look around you. See the order in the chaos. See the care in the placement of every tool. This was my life, and it was a good life. Before you decide what to do, I ask only one thing of you. Live here, for 1 week. Sleep on the cot in the office. Breathe the air of this place. Feel its history. At the end of that week, if you still wish to sell, then so be it. But if you choose to stay, your real work will begin. Start with the heart of this place, where the fire is born, but the steel rests cold. Your grandmother always said I had a flair for the dramatic. Perhaps she was right. Be well, my boy. Know that you were loved. Your grandfather, Arthur Vance. I read the letter 3 times, the paper trembling in my hands. Tears welled in my eyes and dripped onto the dusty floor. I wasn't crying for the grandfather I barely knew. I was crying for the love I had never felt, the guidance I had never received, the sense of belonging that had been ripped away from me. I cried for my father, a man caught between 2 worlds who had ultimately left me with nothing. And I cried for myself, a lonely 18-year-old boy sitting in a dusty blacksmith shop, holding a letter from a dead man. A choice. He had left me a choice. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had one. That night, I slept on the narrow cot in the office. The old wool blankets smelled of cedar and dust. It was cold. The silence was so profound it felt like a presence in the room. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind rattling the window pane, sounded like a gunshot. I lay awake for hours, staring up at the shadowed ceiling, my grandfather's words echoing in my mind. Where the fire is born, but the steel rests cold. The forge. It had to be the forge. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I spent the day exploring the shop again, this time with new eyes. I wasn't just looking at old tools anymore. I was looking at a life. I ran my hands over the smooth, worn handle of a hammer, imagining the thousands of times my grandfather's hand had held it. I touched the face of the anvil, its surface scarred and dented from a century of strikes. This place wasn't dead. It was just sleeping. I found a small pantry off the office with a few cans of beans and a jar of instant coffee that had long since turned into a solid rock. There was running water, a single cold tap that sputtered and coughed before producing a stream of rusty, then clear, cold water. I made a fire in the pot-bellied stove in the office, using old, dry scraps of wood I found in a bin. The warmth slowly pushed back the damp chill. For 3 days, I followed his instructions. I lived in the shop. I cleaned the office, swept the floors, and wiped the thick dust from the windows, letting the bright spring sunlight pour in for the first time in years. I walked into town and used the little cash I had to buy bread, cheese, and coffee. The woman at the grocery store, a kind-faced lady named Martha, looked at me with the same gentle curiosity as the old man. "You're Art Vance's grandson, aren't you?" she asked, her voice warm. "You've got his eyes." The comment sent a strange jolt through me. To be seen not as a stranger, but as a continuation of something, as someone who belonged. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. "Is this Alex Vance?" a slick professional voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Richard Cole. I'm a representative for Vantage Holdings. I'm calling about the property at 14 Blacksmith Lane. We understand you're the new owner. I just wanted to reiterate our standing offer for the property. We're prepared to offer you $5,000. We can have the paperwork drawn up today, cash in your account by tomorrow." The voice was smooth, persuasive. It was the sound of an easy way out. $5,000 felt like a fortune. It was a bus ticket to anywhere. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was a new start. I looked around the sunlit shop. I saw the tools on the wall, the silent anvil, the box with my grandfather's letter still sitting on the workbench. I thought of his words. Vultures in nice suits. An insultingly low offer. "No, thank you," I said. My voice was surprisingly firm. There was a beat of silence. Mr. Cole's tone changed, a thin veneer of politeness chipping away to reveal cold steel. "Mr. Vance, with all due respect, you're sitting on a derelict property with significant tax liabilities coming due. Our offer is more than generous. It's a lifeline. I suggest you reconsider." "I'm not selling," I said, and I hung up the phone. My heart was hammering in my chest. I had just turned down more money than I'd ever had in my life. I had just picked a fight I had no idea how to win. But for the first time since my dad died, I didn't feel helpless. I felt strong. I had made my choice. I was staying. Now it was time to find out what my real work was. I walked over to the forge. It was a massive brick structure, the heart of the shop, where the fire is born, but the steel rests cold. The fire was born in the firepot, the center of the forge. But where did the steel rest cold? Not in the fire, not in the quenching tub. I looked at the base of the forge, the solid brick foundation. It was there, near the bottom, almost hidden in the shadows, that I saw it. A single brick that was a slightly different color, its mortar crumbling around the edges. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt and pried at it with my fingers. It was loose. With a grunt, I worked it free. Behind it was a dark, hollow space. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against cold metal. I pulled out a small, heavy metal lockbox. It was sealed tight. There was no keyhole. I spent the better part of an hour trying to figure out how to open it. I was about to take a hammer to it when I noticed a series of small, almost invisible scratches on the lid. They weren't random. They were numbers. A date. I stared at it, trying to place its significance. Then I remembered the ledgers in the office. I found the one for the corresponding year and flipped through the pages. It was mostly a record of jobs: shoeing horses for local farmers, fixing plows, forging gates. But on the date etched into the box, there was a different kind of entry. It wasn't in my grandfather's neat script. It was in a more delicate, looping hand. My grandmother's. The entry read, "Arthur finished the anniversary box today. A testament to 25 years. My love, my rock, my anchor. The combination is the day our story began. The day their story began. Their wedding anniversary." I flipped back to the front of the ledger. Tucked inside the cover was a small, faded photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day. They were young, smiling, standing in front of this very shop. And on the back of the photo, a date was written. I rushed back to the box and carefully dialed in the numbers on a small, hidden combination lock I hadn't noticed before. The mechanism clicked. The lid sprang open. What I found inside made the $5,000 from Vantage Holdings seem like pocket change. It wasn't money. It was something far more valuable. The box was filled with documents, neatly bundled stacks of paper held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. There were property deeds, not just for the shop, but for several other small plots of land around the town, all in my grandfather's name. There was a bank book showing a modest but stable savings account with enough money to cover the property taxes for the next 20 years. And there was another letter, this one much thicker than the first. I sat on the floor, the contents of the box spread out around me, and I began to read. "Alex," the second letter began, "if you have found this, it means you chose to stay. It means there is more of me in you than I ever could have hoped. I am proud of you. Now, you need to understand the fight you have inherited. Vantage Holdings is not just a development company. It's a predator. For the last 15 years, they have been trying to acquire the land in and around Sparrow Creek to build a luxury resort and golf course. They don't care about this town or the people in it. They see it as a blank canvas for their greed. They started by making lowball offers, like the one they surely made you. When that didn't work, they moved on to other tactics. They would find legal loopholes to challenge deeds. They would run up legal fees on poor families until they had no choice but to sell. They would intimidate, harass, and threaten. I saw it happen to my neighbors, to my friends. Good people who lost everything. I started fighting back, quietly. I began documenting everything. In this box, you will find sworn affidavits from people they forced out. You will find copies of their fraudulent legal challenges. You will find recorded conversations I had with their representatives, where they admit to their tactics. I was building a case against them. I was the one holdout they couldn't break, and I was the one person who had the proof to stop them. This, Alex, is your real inheritance. It's not the shop. It's not the money in the bank. It's this evidence. It's this fight. I am leaving you the choice I never had. You can take this evidence to the authorities, to the press, and you can expose them for what they are. It will be a hard, ugly fight. They are powerful, and they will not go down easily. Or you can burn it all. You can use the money in the bank to live a quiet life here. Fix up the shop. No one would ever know, and no one would blame you. The choice is yours. You are not bound by my war. I am only giving you the weapons to fight it, if you so choose. I sat there in the dusty sunlight, the weight of his words settling over me like a physical blanket. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. My grandfather wasn't just a blacksmith, he was a protector. A quiet, stubborn guardian of his community. He had spent the last years of his life not just swinging a hammer, but building a fortress of evidence, a legacy of defiance. Sharon had called this place worthless. Mr. Cole had called it a derelict property. They were both wrong. This place was an arsenal. I spent the next week poring over the documents. I read the heartbreaking stories of families who had been pushed off land they'd owned for generations. I listened to the recordings, my grandfather's calm, steady voice cornering the slick Vantage representatives until their professional masks slipped and the ugliness beneath showed through. With every page I read, my resolve hardened. This wasn't his war anymore. It was mine. I used the money from the bank account to get the power turned back on in the shop. The old lights flickered to life, illuminating the room in a warm yellow glow. I bought groceries, cleaning supplies, and a new coffee pot. I started the monumental task of cleaning the shop. With every layer of dust I wiped away, I felt like I was bringing the place and a part of myself back to life. The community, which had at first watched me with a reserved curiosity, began to open up. Martha from the grocery store would always add an extra apple or a loaf of bread to my bag, refusing payment. "For Art's boy," she'd say with a smile. The old man from the hardware store, whose name I learned was George, came by one afternoon. He didn't say much. He just stood in the doorway, looking around the half-cleaned shop. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "He stood up for a lot of folks around here. Vantage nearly ruined my brother." Art stepped in. They backed off. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "It's good to have a Vance back in this shop." His words were a gift. They were an anchor. I wasn't just some kid who had inherited a building. I was a Vance. I was part of a story. As I cleaned, I found more of my grandfather's life tucked away in corners. I found a box of old photographs. My dad as a little boy with a smudge of grease on his nose, holding a tiny hammer. My grandmother, beautiful and smiling, planting flowers in a window box outside the office. My grandfather, younger, stronger, his face lit by the glow of the forge. For the first time, I felt the loss of these people not as a vague absence, but as a sharp, painful ache. I was grieving for a family I had never truly known. In his desk, I found his journals. They weren't just work logs. They were filled with his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. He wrote about his arguments with my father. "He wants a different life," one entry read. "A life of offices and clean hands. He sees this place as a prison. I see it as freedom. I cannot make him understand." He wrote about his grief after my grandmother died. "The fire in the forge feels cold without her here." And he wrote about me. "My grandson. I see pictures of him. He has his father's smile, but his grandmother's eyes. I hope he grows up to be a man of character. I hope he understands the value of things that cannot be bought or sold." Reading his words, I felt a profound connection, a conversation across time. He had left me a roadmap, not just to fight a legal battle, but to build a life. He had shown me what it meant to be a man. It wasn't about being an adult, as Sharon had spat the word at me. It was about character. It was about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. One rainy afternoon, I found the last piece of the puzzle. Tucked into the back of his final journal was one last envelope. This one was unsealed. "Alex," it said, "there is one more thing you must know. The evidence you have is strong, but Vantage has deep pockets. They can tie this up in court for years. There is, however, a faster way. The founder and CEO of Vantage Holdings is a man named Marcus Thorne, a man with a carefully crafted public image as a philanthropist. What the public doesn't know is that he personally directed the more aggressive tactics used here in Sparrow Creek. I have a recording, a final one. It's a phone call between Thorne himself and his regional manager discussing the plan to compel me to sell. It is unequivocal. It is career-ending. It is the silver bullet. But I have hidden it. Not in the shop. It is in a safe deposit box at the county bank. The key is with my lawyer, a man named Ben Carter. His card is in this envelope. He is the only person I trusted. He retired shortly after I died, but he will know what to do. I hid it separately because it is the most dangerous piece of evidence you have. Once you use it, there is no turning back. Thorne will not just lose a lawsuit, he will lose everything. Men like that do not lose gracefully. So again, the choice is yours. You can fight the long battle with what you have, or you can end it quickly and decisively. But know that ending it will put you in the crosshairs. I did not want to leave you with that danger, but I also could not bring myself to destroy it. It is the ultimate tool for justice, and I leave it in your hands. Whatever you choose, live a life you can be proud of. That is all I ever wanted for you and for your father. I sat back, the letter resting on my knees. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the old metal roof. This was it, the final test, the final choice. A quiet life or a righteous, dangerous storm. I looked around the shop. The tools on the wall seemed to gleam in the dim light. The anvil stood like a silent judge. This place wasn't just a building anymore. It was a part of me. Its history was my history. Its fight was my fight. My grandfather had spent years building this case, standing alone against a powerful enemy. How could I let his work be for nothing? How could I hide when he had taught me, through his letters and his legacy, how to stand? I knew what I had to do. There was no other choice, not for a Vance. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Ms. Albright, the legal aid lawyer. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice clear and steady. It's Alex Vance. I've decided what to do about my grandfather's property. I'm not selling, I'm fighting. I heard a surprised silence on the other end of the line. Alex, she said slowly, I'm not sure you understand what you'd be up against. I think I do, I interrupted, a new confidence flowing through me. And I think I have what it takes to win. My grandfather left me everything I need. I also have the name of his personal lawyer, a Mr. Ben Carter. I was hoping you could help me get in touch with him. There was another pause, and then her tone shifted. The detached professionalism was gone, replaced by a spark of something else. Respect. I see, she said. Ben Carter. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. He was one of the best, a real fighter. Alex, what did you find in that old shop? I smiled, the first genuine, hopeful smile I'd had in years. I found my inheritance, I said. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ms. Albright helped me contact Ben Carter, a gruff, elderly man with a voice like gravel who, upon hearing my story, came out of retirement without a second thought. He listened intently as I laid out the contents of the lockbox, his eyes lighting up with a fire I recognized from my grandfather's journals. We retrieved the final recording from the safe deposit box. Listening to Marcus Thorne's voice, so calm and cold as he discussed ruining an old man's life, made my blood run cold. But it also erased any last shred of doubt. We had him. We didn't go to the authorities, we went to the press. A major investigative journalist got the story, and it exploded. Vantage Holdings, predatory practices exposed by founder's own words. The story of the lone blacksmith who had quietly built a case from beyond the grave and the grandson who had chosen to see it through was powerful. The recording was undeniable. Vantage Holdings' stock plummeted. Marcus Thorne was forced to resign in disgrace, facing multiple state and federal investigations. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the families in Sparrow Creek, using my grandfather's evidence as its foundation. They wouldn't get their land back, but they would get justice. They would get restitution. My life changed. I was no longer an anonymous, forgotten kid. I was Art Vance's grandson. People in town would stop me on the street, shake my hand, their eyes filled with a gratitude that was humbling and almost overwhelming. They didn't see me as a hero. They saw me as a continuation of the man they had respected for so long. Sharon saw the story on the news. She called me once. Her voice was a strange mix of shock and something I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe it was envy. She had sold my father's house, chasing a life of simple, clean transactions. And I had inherited a dusty old shop that had ended up being worth more than she could ever imagine. I didn't hold any anger for her anymore. I just felt a quiet pity. She saw value only in dollars, and in doing so, had missed the meaning of everything. I kept the conversation short. We had nothing left to say to each other. I didn't become a farrier. The world didn't have much need for one anymore. But I kept the shop. I restored it. I cleaned every tool until it shone, oiled every hinge, and repaired the sagging roof. I turned it into a small museum, a community space, a monument to my grandfather and to the history of the town he had fought so hard to protect. I learned to work with metal, not as a trade, but as a hobby, a way to connect with him. I fired up the forge, and with the help of George from the hardware store, I learned to shape the steel. I wasn't very good at it, but every clumsy hammer strike felt like a conversation with my grandfather. It felt like coming home. I found my purpose not in a profession, but in a place, in a legacy. My grandfather had left me more than a shop, more than a fight. He had left me a sense of self. He had taught me that inheritance isn't about what you are given, but what you choose to do with it. It's about the values you carry forward, the promises you keep, the community you build. He had given me a foundation, not of concrete, but of character. And on that foundation, I could build anything. The world will tell you that some things are worthless, an old building, a forgotten craft, a promise to a dead man. People will tell you to be practical, to take the easy money, to move on. But sometimes, the things that look worthless on the outside hold the most value within. Sometimes, the heaviest burdens are the greatest gifts. My inheritance was a dusty, forgotten farrier shop, and it was the single most valuable thing in the world, because it didn't just save me from being homeless, it taught me who I was. And I know there are so many of you out there who have your own version of this story. Maybe it wasn't a shop. Maybe it was a box of old letters, a piece of advice from a grandparent, or just a stubborn belief in doing the right thing that you inherited. These are the legacies that truly matter. They don't show up on a balance sheet, but they are the bedrock of our lives. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for something that others called worthless, I want you to do two things. First, hit that subscribe button and join this community. We're building a place here for stories about second chances, about finding strength in unexpected places. And second, go down to the comments and tell me, what is the most valuable, worthless thing you have ever inherited? I'm going to read every single one, because your stories matter. You are not alone in your fight. Thank you for listening.